Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Sean Moriarty, CEO of PrimerAI, a company at the forefront of applying artificial intelligence to mission-critical national security and defense challenges. Sean's background is awesome, leading innovative technology companies from Ticketmaster to Leaf Group, and now he's steering Primer as it helps government and defense organizations make sense of a massive, complex data in real time. So Sean, thanks for joining and talking with me today.
Dave, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
This is fantastic. And your background, is amazing. So let's start with your journey. You've getting up to the point where you led major consumer tech and then, stepped into national security AI. Talk to me about that journey and what about the mission for applied AI in defense and intelligence you found attractive.
Yeah, it's funny. The career journey thing is something I guess I jump into a little reluctantly. I just, I got to think about putting one dumb foot in front of the other and, moving to where opportunity presents and things that you're curious about and you care about. I was fortunate to come up, my career with the rise of the commercialization of the internet, in the mid 90s. And, really that's where, I was able to understand, I guess as someone, kind of early in their career and relatively young could, the power of emerging technology and the way it shapes, ultimately society. And, I started my career as a QA engineer, and I learned really quickly, I like to build products and build teams. The first company that I was at was CitySearch. We were the first geospatial and temporal search engine on the internet, working largely with unstructured data. As that company grew, we ultimately acquired Ticketmaster.com, which was the online arm of Ticketmaster, later acquired Ticketmaster itself. I came up through the product and technology ranks and moved into general management and ultimately ran the Ticketmaster business from '05 to '09. And really, I would say, again, the idea of building products that make a difference for the customer was really, at the core of my career journey. And with that, to build really good products, you need deep customer understanding. You got to care about the nature of the work that they're doing. And you really need to be excited about putting together high caliber teams who can build those products, right? That's really the name of the game. Deep understanding of customer need, real conviction and care about their work. You probably should care about it as much as they do if you're going to be really good at it. And then knowing how to get the right people together to build those products that can drive that mission forward. And so, I've always been guided by problems that are in areas that I'm interested in, where emerging technology can make a difference and move them forward. And at this point in my career, to be able to take what I've learned, and I still have a ton to learn, and that's one of the wonderful things about business, but apply that, to supporting missions that are so profoundly important, it's a blessing and a privilege.
Yeah, that's great. To go back a little bit, just because I find it interesting, the second startup I've been in, you're a product guy from the beginning, and now I'm transitioning to CEO, or, now leading large companies. A lot of times those CEOs or leaders are more on the sales or go-to-market side. Talk to me about your journey from just like leading more as a product and then transitioning to a role of CEO.
Yeah, I think the transition to general management for me was, I was pretty ambitious. The study and practice of leadership was important to me, and the idea that, hey, I think I'm pretty good at this. I'd like to get better at it. And, how can I maximize my own growth and impact? I think coming from a product background in our world of software is a really important one. And by the way, you have extraordinarily successful CEOs who have come up from pretty much every domain and discipline in an organization. But for sure, when revenue is the name of the game, you often see folks, come out of the sales organization. They tend to be excellent storytellers. They know how to get in front of the customers, understand their needs, and deliver. Even on the, when I was coming up on the product and tech side, I really enjoyed spending time with customers and getting to understand their problems. And, I felt, and there's no genius insight on my part, but the best products were always one which were born of deep customer understanding and empathy. And so even, when I was running product and technology at Ticketmaster, I spent a ton of time with customers. and not, just senior leader meetings, but I wanted to talk to the people who were using the tools that we were building every day. What's good about this tool? What would make it better? What doesn't work? And, that testimony, when you bring it back and distill it and you're driven by that, I think ultimately you will end up building a really good business if you're in the right category and you deliver on that. And so, being in front of the customer, even, when, I was working, and I think starting as a QA engineer helps because you're using stuff all day long. You're trying to break it. And you get a pretty good sense of, gosh, this is a pretty tough workflow. There's got to be a better way to do that. And you then realize the difference between a great product and a just okay product really comes from a deeper understanding of what people need to do to get their job done.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, product and these software companies over time will win. It does become how good your product is. So PrimerAI, for those that don't know, share a little bit about, what you're doing in this space and what your challenges are, as you move forward.
Yeah. So we at Primer, we're really focused on giving our customers the ability to make sense out of the world, parts of it that matter to them in near real time by being able to ingest and analyze massive amounts of unstructured data in near real time and to be able to execute deep search and analysis against that data, get signal from noise, and inform higher quality, faster decisions.
And so is that pretty much, across the board, any context, any domain, you can get in there with unstructured data, and your product, your algorithm, basically allows you to do that?
Yeah. So, at our core, we've got deep natural language processing chops, and, we leverage both proprietary models that we've built as well as, the language models, large and small, to bring greater speed, power, and accuracy to that analysis. We live in a world which is drowning in data, right? And so if you are an analyst or an operator, and let's say you're trying to make sense of a particular theater of operation, area of the world, or particular topic, and you're doing it with open source data. So you've got a massive amount of stuff out there on social media and news sources, way too much for you to read by yourself. And by the way, the vast majority of that data is unstructured, right? The way we think about unstructured, think about human readable text. And that could be everything from a sit rep to information on a publicly available website. And so there's so much signal on the OSINT and PAI side that is just impossible for humans to read. And we live in a world where people, they don't want to miss things, but they can't be drowning in noise all day.
Absolutely. And so just for clarification for, some folks as well as myself, the difference between like a OpenAI solution and you, or similar, or like how would you, define the differences there?
Sure. So, the large language models can be indispensable in certain settings, particularly around summarization. But the way that we think about things is we operate, one level up from that. We're really at the application layer, and there's a lot of workflow tooling that goes on, I would say, both to the left and the right of a large language model or even a smaller model, that if you're, an analyst and you're working every day with, your kind of tradecraft and your established working patterns that need to be done, right? I think when people see that chat interface at OpenAI, as powerful and wonderful as it is, they think, oh, this is what AI is. But there's a whole lot more to it than that. One, obviously, if you're dealing with sensitive information, most folks don't want to be putting that in these settings into a public LLM. Number two, there's an awful lot of things they need to do in their workflows around what are the sources that I want to be able to draw from that are canonical for us? How do I bring those into a system to understand them? How do I compile this into a report that I can actually share? How can I save stuff off into a folder so that either I can pick up my work or someone else can pick it up on the next shift? So there's a lot of workflow tooling that goes on. There's no question that the language models are indispensable in certain contexts of our work, but there's a whole lot more to it than that when you think about end-to-end workflows for users.
So when you go back to your time at, like, let's say Ticketmaster or Elite Group, or you could use whichever previous experience, AI was in a different state. If I were to, pick a word for that, very different than it is now, and it's changing. How have you seen that transition from, like, those machine learning concepts to now we're accelerating into AI? And when did that really pick up for you, or your visibility into the opportunity available with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, if you go back, I go back to my, city search days, which is nearing 30 years ago, we were trying to crawl, classify, and index, the publicly available internet and effectively find and fix physical locations in that search context so that people could find things of interest effectively anywhere in the world. And so, back then, we tried to use a lot of the algorithms and techniques that were available, which, if you look, some of the fundamental principles and approaches have been around for near 50 years. But the compute environment, compute and storage weren't what they are today. So I would say that's the biggest change, right? Now, I would say by, early 2010s, organizations started, leveraging machine learning for tasks. But the next big jump up certainly came with the rise of the models, right? Google released BERT, I believe, back in 2017, and people saw, wow, this is almost a form of magic, which any disruptive technology is. It produces almost a step function in capability. And then that gave rise to the LLMs, right? And so, and now we live in a world, thanks to NVIDIA and others, that are relatively speaking compute rich, although we are still somewhat constrained, right? I think NVIDIA can't build stuff fast enough for the market that's out there, but we now have the storage capability, the network, and the processing power where you can really leverage these techniques that, came out of academia, again, decades and decades ago, and they work.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of hype in AI, right? Especially in defense. You hear a lot, like, everyone's AI, every VC is getting pitched AI, products. What would you say differentiates kind of your approach to what people call, they are AI native, different perspectives?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Every disruptive technology inevitably is going to come, with a hype cycle, and that's kind of and we've seen this, with regularity, certainly over the course of my career and even before that. And, I think initially people think, that a disruptive technology is this pixie dust that you can just sprinkle over your stuff and all of a sudden you're transformed to a much better place than you were before. But, in reality, and I think, Alex Karp at Palantir said this best, a couple of years ago when he said, hey, when you think about AI, you should really be thinking about software that works, right? Because ultimately, technology, they're tools, and they're tools to advance, the cause of humanity, right? And tools well executed should make people far more effective in their jobs. And so, I'd like to think with our approach that, we work very closely with our customers and we work backwards from customer need, right? We don't kind of come in and say, hey, you need an AI solution. We have one. And if you just adopt AI, you're going to be better. What really matters is what's the job you're doing today? Where does the tooling you have today fall short? What's taking too long? What are important things to do that you can't do presently? And that's what you really need to bring to the table. And, the technology that exists, if appropriately put together, integrated into a software solution, can substantially deliver on that. So that's where I think the differentiation is, right? It's not that you can just magically deploy an LLM and transform your organization as powerful as the LLMs are. This is really about understanding what are the limitations to people doing their job at the best possible level to succeed in the mission, and then building software that allows them to do that. So I view AI kind of appropriately deployed as fundamental components of far more powerful software tools.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. We often say that the end customer, in our space, cybersecurity, they don't care how you get there. They just want it done faster, easier, more efficient.
Yeah.
It's the outcome that.
I'll give you an example of that. So, we produce fully deployable enterprise software, but we also make all of our capabilities available via API. And the reason we do that is we recognize, we're, inside the organizations that we serve, they're often drowning in tools. They have existing platforms and partners. Some of them may work quite well, others not so much. And if we look at a situation and say, hey, what you're looking for is a capability we have that exists within the broader platform, but that's all you need, we can make that available via API. So we're not going to disrupt your workflows. We're going to augment them. And so, I think meeting that customer where they are, as cliche as it sounds, is vitally important, because the idea that you're going to be able to quickly rip, replace, and redeploy with fully modern tooling, I think is a fool's errand. No matter how fast we want to go, this stuff takes time. And what you really want to do is bring these capabilities to the customer as quickly as you can, almost independent of the way that you do it, driven by enabling them to get to mission success faster.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, in this, you mentioned open source, data and different things, misinformation and AI generated content, it's tough to sort through that. When you apply this to defense, as they're looking through their data, how should they be looking at or preparing for those environments? And how do you guys handle this, in your own, modeling?
Sure. So, first of all, I should also call out, we also do a lot of work with proprietary data. So, as ultimately, the objective is to give the most clear and factually accurate site picture you possibly can. And while there is signal in OSINT, there's tremendous value in proprietary sources as well. And we operate, as much on proprietary source data as we do open source. We have the ability, when appropriate, to bring those things together. So I just, wanted to call that out. When it gets to, misinformation, when it gets to, I would say, kind of the accuracy of generative output, we do an awful lot of work there, right? So it's everything from being able to identify claims in text and then actually compare them to grounded data, which you could just look at as, these are things we know as factual. We're going to compare this claim to that grounded data set, which is often a proprietary data set, and see if there's a mismatch. And if there is, we're going to flag it. The other thing we do is, for every single thing that we bring up, we provide full sourcing. So you'll see everything footnoted and highlighted, and the user has the ability from one click from any piece of generative output to go back to original source so they can see it with their own eyes. And so they can see contested claims. So sometimes you'll have generative output, because remember, you're pulling stuff down from a multitude of sources, and you can say, hey, publication X says this and publication Y says this. These things are in conflict, and it gives the person the ability to adjudicate that using their own expertise or another source which they know to be accurate. So that's important. The other thing we do is around hallucination mitigation, because we know that, LLMs have a tendency to hallucinate depending on the knowledge domain. It could be upwards of 10%. We surface things. So basically what we're doing in the most simple sense is playing back each generative chunk of information produced to go see if actually that's corroborated by the source, right? Because your generative output works primarily by way of next word prediction, which can lead to hallucination. So we've done a lot of proprietary work to both mitigate, reduce hallucination, but also flag either potential hallucination, might not actually be a hallucination, it could just be a contested claim.
Yeah, definitely a challenge, but that's great, because that is, misinformation and just is a challenge, definitely across the board.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is with any new technology, what we generally recognize is, the bad guys move faster than the good guys do. And, they weaponize, new capabilities really quickly. So it's gotten easier and easier to produce and distribute misinformation. That said, the quality of the tooling available today, and certainly in our solution, really allows you to mitigate against that.
Yeah. So if we back out, take a step back up to 30,000 feet, just general AI discussions, there's been a lot of conversations about the broader implications of AI, not just for national security, but, you hear jobs that are coming at risk, creativity is coming at risk, heck, even the humankind, if you will. From your vantage point, working in AI, how do we ensure it's a force multiplier for us, vice, you know, drifting off and becoming something else? Does that worry you at all? Is that like, where do you sit on the spectrum of the threat of AI versus the opportunity to really embrace and improve mankind?
Yeah. So, I wouldn't say I'm a hardcore dogmatic techno optimist, but I am a techno optimist. And so I worry about these very same things. But if I kind of step back from that very natural emotional response and I just look at the march of history, right? This happens with every new technology, everything from job displacement to, hey, the more we automate, do we lose human knowledge and expertise because we outsource thinking to the machine? And I think that's something that we're always going to live with. But history would actually tell us that what ends up happening is actually when a disruptive technology comes to fore, yes, it displaces jobs. And I do think we need to do a better job at anticipating and addressing some of that. But if you look at it over time, new technologies have always created more jobs than they've displaced. They just tend to be different jobs and often didn't exist before, so we can't see them. And so I think, there's a fear of the unknown under this, which drives it. But history would actually tell you, realistically speaking, technology grows economies and creates new opportunity, right? So, if you were back in, horse and carriage days and you saw the decline of buggy whips and all of the, blacksmiths and anybody else that were supporting that trade, you'd say, well, what's going to happen when the car comes in? And you couldn't have possibly seen the jobs created by mechanics and parts manufacturers. And all of a sudden, you have a much greater transportation economy than you had before.
Take devil's advocate upon that, though. I'd say most of our revolutionary, technological disruptions happened over decades.
Yeah.
The interesting one with AI, it seems like it's going so fast that the opportunity to evolve, learn, create new jobs, there's going to be a big gap. So that's, do you see that as well, or is that really?
Yeah, look, I look, and I'm not trying to explain away, will there be near-term displacement and disruption? I think there is. And I think, like, as I said earlier, I think in the past, we've not necessarily done a great job. If you think about it kind of in the physical world, right? And you think about it through the lens of outsourcing manufacturing, like we did, wherever your opinion on that lies, we did not do a great job dealing with the consequences of offshoring, where jobs that were very good jobs for a long period of time left the nation, right? And it's, as much as we'd like to say, hey, we can retrain, reskill, people can move to the next job, history tells us it's a little harder than that. So there's work to be done there. By the same token, you always look at, I always look at, the world we're in, there's more things we should be doing for the betterment of society than we are doing, meaning there's a ton of stuff that we're not touching at all. And so you say, okay, if you're freeing people up, particularly if you think about like our work, it's important work, but a lot of what we're doing is taking a lot of time that is necessary, but not value add or strategic, and making the machine doing it and giving that time back to people who actually are trained and have expertise. And actually, it unlocks time they have for creative thinking and better decision making. And so I think in many ways, AI kind of emancipates people from right now necessary, but a lot of times, just foundational drudge work. And if you can outsource that to the machine and unlock human creativity, you're far better served by that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Like we used to say, in one of our customer settings, basically, someone would come in at the beginning of the shift. They had several hundred documents that they had to go through. That's impossible to read even in an entire shift. And they got pretty good at figuring out which, documents or reports were higher signal, and they'd effectively triage those. Well, The machine gives you the ability to parse all of those in a matter of minutes, summarize them, and all of a sudden you get to start your day where you used to end it. And you can actually do real analysis. And if you're, I would say, people are spending more time assembling information than they are analyzing it. And that slows that cycle down. And you're also consigning someone who's capable of doing much more to do things that are necessary, but again, not value add. And that's one use case. How much value do you get doing the administrative or clerical work versus the stuff that would really be valuable, to your business in your life? And if you can give people hours back, it actually creates more opportunity.
Oh yeah, right now, let there be no doubt, there is massive value in being able to summarize, give, simple things like NDAs. Where's the risk in this? By just reading every piece of language and, yeah, there's definitely, it's fantastic right now.
Yeah.
And I think it will be. It'll continue to shift.
Think about, with the rise, of drones, right, in this era kind of unmanned flight, think about the economy that will spin up over time, whether it's parts manufacturing or maintenance or anything else. Like, robots can be profoundly valuable in some settings, but not all, particularly for complex, precise work. And someone's also got to build and maintain and advance the robots. So you're going to see jobs that employ hundreds of thousands of people a decade out, millions of people a couple decades out that don't even exist today.
Yeah.
I do believe that, but I'm not blind to, that initial disruption, because you can reap the benefits of the tech that will eliminate jobs and you won't necessarily replace them. And it won't be one for one. Someone who lost an administrative job over here is not going to jump to the next job created necessarily. And that's the gap we got to get better at addressing.
So you don't have a lot of fear of AI, if you think of AI as it gets more and more intelligent, identifying, well, my number one priority is energy. I need to get energy. And so it's figuring out ways to maximize systems and economies, through that. And then at some point, we don't even need humans anymore because all we need is energy. We don't need, ecosystem.
Yeah.
Big, long fears.
I don't worry about that, because I do believe, look, the artificial intelligence is a tool, right, in service of the human. And the work that we're doing is going to be geared towards solving human problems.
Yeah. Those are just some of the, some perspectives that always make me.
Yeah. No, I understand. And I don't dismiss those things out of hand. I think they're very natural. But again, we are a remarkably adaptive species who is very good at leveraging technology. We're not perfect, right? So disruption happens. New technology comes along, it's used for harm rather than good, or the harm outweighs the good. And it takes us a while to figure that out. And by the way, it's not a risk-free trade or transition. I mean, we're living that now with social media. I would say very clearly the rise of social media, I believe, is profoundly problematic, because it's commandeered so much attention. It's rife with misinformation. And there's no question, in my mind at least, that it's kind of broken that sense of community, because it's replaced a lot of real world interaction between human beings, which I think is fundamental to healthy communities. And we got to figure that out.
Good.
And that's been costly.
Absolutely. If we pivot a little more back to kind of, Primer, as you look at like your customer, so let's just use broad sense, government customer, NATO, maybe military or DOD, DOW, I guess we call it now. Are they educated enough to know what they want, or do you oftentimes get requests from organizations that say, I need some AI?
Yeah, I would say, particularly over the course of the past, couple of years, people have come a long way, in their thinking. But I got to tell you, most of the folks that, that I speak with in the IC, the Department of War, they're really thoughtful and sophisticated, even if they're not technologists, right? They're up, they are for the most part up the curve. They want these technologies and capabilities. I do think, we have some challenges, in the middle, right? We've got, the complexity of procurement. We've got, we have not figured out as a nation how to fast path upgrading of critical capabilities we're amazing as a nation in response to crisis. On the preparation side, the history of the United States certainly over the past century would tell you we're kind of at our best when we've about run out of time, but in preparation, not so good. I'd like to think we're getting better now, but I do believe we're not moving fast enough. But I don't think it's from a lack of understanding, at the leadership level, at the operational level. I think there's just a lot we need to do in really just kind of reinventing the way the government acquires and deploys technology. And I think we're making good strides there. But again, when you're behind, you almost can't go fast enough.
Yeah, our bureaucracy or our giant organizational systems are so hard to change. That aircraft carrier is cooking at 60 knots. It's tough to stop, turn around, and go to the direction.
Yeah, and we have to acknowledge that and figure out, and there's been some, and as you've got a procurement process that was really built out decades ago, primarily for the access of hardware-based systems. Yeah, there was software in them, but if you think about the world we're in today, the warfighter should have the best software in the world in their hands, full stop. And as a nation, we are more equipped than any other nation to produce the world's best software to meet their needs.
Yes. Well, speaking of, securing that software, cybersecurity. So you guys put out something, basically called cybersecurity double-edged sword. What was in, break that down a little bit. What does it mean to defense organizations? How should they think about that?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd say, we as a nation have to get much better at cybersecurity. All you have to look at is the number of hacks and exploits that have happened in the commercial sector, in the government sector. The vast majority of those, we didn't make the adversary work that hard, right? So that was more like if we had been adhering to security best practices. I'm not saying that some of those breaches wouldn't occur, that, they could have occurred via more sophisticated methods, but we can't make it easy. But that's really more about adherence to policy and best practice, because if you look at the exploits, these are known exploits that should have been patched and addressed well before they actually happened. Now, the other side of that, though, is if you are deathly afraid, hypothetically, of security risk, and the consequence of that is you're not deploying cutting edge stuff to the areas that need it most, you're slowing down the process. So my view on this always is we should have a really robust cybersecurity framework. We should have very kind of aggressive oversight to make sure implementation and best practice is followed. But, when new technologies emerge, they should be rigorously tested very quickly, but we can't be worried about hypothetical risks. And we have to have an on-ramp that says we're going to do very aggressive, robust vetting to make sure anything new we put in place passes muster, but we're not going to get stuck in some sort of bureaucratic morass or worry about hypothetical risks. Another example of this would be, if you go back a couple of years, people were talking about AI safety and what should the policy be and what should the framework be. And don't get me wrong, like AI safety is important, but I will tell you, as a practitioner, this idea that you can solve things in a vacuum and you should solve them before, and you can kind of instrument the way software is developed through vague policy, and then everything that follows is going to have hit the safety hurdle you want. That's just not the way the real world works. And my view, if you go back a couple of years ago, and I said this publicly, was there was far more risk in us being too slow to adopt cutting edge technology than the theoretical risks of AI safety. And again, in my experience, you can't solve all of these cases in the abstract. So, and when you deploy with proper oversight, you get to understand things in the real world. And when something rears its head as a problem, you solve it. And I was not worried that we were effectively going to abdicate responsibility or thinking to some sort of system that we would realize after the fact that was doing all sorts of harmful things and we just let it run. Honestly, I feel that's a phantom fear. We got smart people who are very dedicated, who are going to provide that level of oversight and responding quickly to known gaps and defects in the real world as you're applying stuff. That's the way you go faster. And that's the way you go safer. It's like an engineer safety in a vehicle and saying, until we've convinced ourselves in the abstract that this meets the safety requirement, we're not going to do anything. You're going to add 5 to 10 years on getting out there. And by the way, you're going to get hit by a bunch of stuff that you never could have solved in the abstract because it's called the real world, and the real world's messy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit similar to like commercial tech, Silicon Valley kind of mentality in the software world. An MVP, you put something up, it's not right, but you're going to quickly iterate it. You have positioning where on the government side, it has been more, we need the right product now. It's got to be perfect, which has slowed it down. So I think the merging of these.
By the way, if you kind of look at the results, and I'm big on outcomes, you'd say, okay, so this has been our approach. We kind of want to define perfection in the standard beforehand, and then we're going to adopt. Well, if that was working as well as we'd like, it would be manifest in the technology we employ. And that's actually not the case. We pay too much, it takes too long, and ultimately it's not nearly as good as it could be. Now, I want to be clear on something, though, because I think it's important that it's not, the kind of, if you go back to early Facebook, now Meta, there was this notion of move fast, break things. Well, when you're an ad-supported site that consumers are using, that rapid, cycle, there's a lot of good that can come from that because the stakes are relatively low on what broken means. That's not true in many of the settings that we work in, but we're well apprised of that, right? And our customer is too, and they know what level of risk that they are willing to take and what they're not take, and hitting that bar is the key. So there's no question, I wouldn't advocate for, hey, just let's go a zillion miles an hour. Don't worry about this stuff. We'll figure it out afterwards. But I just have a high degree of confidence that you can engineer this stuff in very close to the edge, working closely with a customer, and they know what defect rate they're willing to tolerate very well. And they're not going to compromise that.
Yeah. It is definitely a tough paradigm to shift, on the, government side. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, look, bureaucracy, is culture, and culture is, the hardest thing to change, even with kind of the right top-down mandate. And even if everybody's agreeing, because you still may have 37 steps to complete something. And until you actually change that to something else, you're going through those 37 steps. I do think you can change things, though, by way of incentive structure, which is really about what are the standards by which we adopt best of breed technology and time bounding it, right? Like, hey, have a standard which says this is absolutely mission critical. We want to make sure that we are employing best of breed technology in this area within X period of time. Go. Because then all of a sudden, if you're just trying to re-engineer process by looking at current complexity and trying to make it less, that will take you forever. That's incrementalism. But if you say this organization needs this capability within this time period, say, okay, that's the goal, then everything underneath, the stuff that is going to prevent that from happening, you just eliminate. That will allow you to develop much more efficient pathways than kind of incremental reform from within.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's go then to some kind of use case. So you've worked with multiple government agencies, allied nations. Obviously, you can't break NDAs or the classification. Yep. What are some use cases that really capture the impact that primers really brought to our warfighters or critical missions out there in the real world?
Yeah. So, I'll give you a couple examples. So one, we originally incubated out of Incremental. We've done a lot of work, in the IC. And, I think we have dramatically accelerated analytical workflows within the IC, right? Because we're able to go through data that would take months, if not years to read, in a matter of minutes or potentially hours, right? So all of a sudden you're talking about a world in which there's much greater situational awareness, much faster, which means you're also much better equipped to rapid change on top of that, meaning you're closer to where things are now and then much better equipped to a situation that's evolving very quickly. And timeframes matter a lot. We had done some work, inside the DOW, and basically, the customer was monitoring the movements of a particular group, through our OSINT tooling, and was able to see that this particular group was moving, in the direction of, some good folks, and effectively were on a collision course. And that, as a consequence of that, they were able to move the good guys out of that area very quickly. Now, this was work that was able to be done in a matter of hours. That movement happened in a matter of days. And, the customer said, hey, this work would have taken us probably nearly 2 months, 50 days to do, which would have been out of the time frame to take effective action.
That's pretty impressive.
There's a lot out there because, again, the world is really noisy. It is very, very hard to get to signal. We got really good people. They've got good instincts. They also occasionally get lucky, but this can really shift the odds in their favor.
Yeah, I mean, the fog and frictional ore, if you can reduce that at all, that's significant.
That's, look, if we can give smart, motivated people with good training more time to think and better situational awareness faster, we will ultimately get to better decisions, more forceful, effective actions. There's just no question in my mind about that.
Right. So you've talked before about, how partnerships, across ecosystems are super important. How do you see, I'd say, the collaboration between primes, startups, governments evolving where we can do better with implementing solution sets, AI adoption without sacrificing security or trust?
Yeah, again, I think this goes back to, certainly our philosophy, which is, hey, we're here to serve the customer, to deliver on mission as quickly and effectively as we can possibly help them do it, which means you've got to just play things where they are. We are very happy to work with any partner who's already there or is going there, and it informs the way we design our products. So, this whole notion of every capability available via API so that it can be plugged into existing system, it can be brought into a new system. There may be use cases where, Prime is working on X, and, search on unstructured text and analysis is 5% of the solution. The reality is we can make that capability available, to that customer via that Prime, in parallel to their efforts. They don't have to spin up another contract. They don't have to launch a new application. They don't have to launch a new screen. And then the other thing I'd say is, as we've been very, if you look at software deployments in the government, until relatively recently, they have been very heavily services based, right? Certainly Palantir has really ushered in, this, hey, deploy best of breed enterprise software product and then reap the benefit of an innovation cycle that comes with commercial companies that are innovating, that are basically synthesizing from a broader set of needs, and you get all the benefit of the delivery against that roadmap. So your primes, which have been developing software to be sure, but largely through a service delivery model, increasingly they're pushing, which has long been a mandate, the adoption of commercial software product, but really has not been necessarily a priority or how it's laid out. I think we're now in a position where much more effective partnerships with commercial software product companies and the primes and the system integrators is possible, because that's the direction that people want to go, and we can go faster together.
Yeah, absolutely. Critical. Absolutely critical. You have, you served and served on boards. You've been involved with the Pat Tillman Foundation, Special Operations Warrior Foundation. Where does your passion for vets come from?
Yeah. So, my dad was an old first Cav trooper, first to the ninth in Vietnam in 65 and 66. And, he was a pretty quiet guy. His service was very, very, important to him. And so too, was his patriotism. And, I wanted to, honor that, and although, I never served, the the opportunity to help veterans, in any way that, I can has been long been important to me. And, I'd also say, when I was running Ticketmaster, two of my closest friends who were Marine Corps infantry officers were deploying back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I kind of contrasted what I was doing with all the work they were doing post 9/11. And you realize, I guess at any given time, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% of the population of the nation, maybe a little less than that, is serving. And, we need to honor and support that service. And so certainly the Pat Tillman Foundation, where every year we've got a class of about 60 scholars who, are transitioning into civilian life, extraordinary leaders looking to continue in civilian life. It was a wonderful kind of organization to foster that. And certainly also, I think burnish and support and carry Pat's legacy. And then, over the past several years, the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, which does just extraordinary work, serving the families, of our fallen special operators. And they do that, cradle through adulthood. It's profoundly important work. I'm humbled to be a small part of it, but and it's a daily reminder to me of the sacrifices that have been made in support of this nation. It's a vital part, and that's a load carried by very few. But I do think every American has, an obligation to respect and honor that and support it in any way that they can. So, that's why I'm proud to spend a good chunk of my time there.
Yeah, and thank you for your commitment to that. I mean, it matters. It really does make a difference. So with that, if you scaled multiple organizations, you've been both on the commercial and defense startup or large company size, what would you have advice for like defense tech startup companies that want to get into the DoD, or just, companies, both from just how you build a company, and things you should think about as running it, and then getting into the defense side?
Yeah. So a few things. I think one of the wonderful things about what we do, because we are focused on mission, even in a world as crowded as AI is for talent, you have that advantage of being able to find people who want to work on mission. Really important stuff that matters an awful lot. And a lot of commercial companies can't offer that. Right. And so leverage that advantage. There are so many talented people out there that really care about and would love to be aligned with and support mission. So you should play to that strength of opportunity and ultimately what is a talent assembly game. That's number one. I think number two, I think things are changing in the way that capabilities are acquired. So certainly the CIO and CTO shops are very important. But at the same time, there is a lot of pull from, the end user, and understanding the mission sets that you're best equipped to serve and really trying to get as close as you can to that end user to understand, what it is they need, so that can inform the way you think about developing your product. You want to be talking to those leadership shops at the CIO and CTO level, but ultimately, this idea of gathering standards exhaustively over long periods of time, picking a technology and driving it down and in, that's changed, dramatically and will continue to. So really getting close to mission so you can have those substantive conversations, and that can be hard. And then I'd say that, the third thing is do your homework on what's necessary to provide capabilities into these organizations, right? So ultimately, if you're working in the Department of War or the IC, you're going to need cleared personnel. If that's where you want to start, I'd bring some people in who have the ability to do that, right? You also now, fortunately, you've got Palantir with the FedStart program, you've got Second Front, so emerging technologies can deploy onto those platforms, which helps for accreditation, right? And then really understanding what it needs to be, to get a facilities clearance. And from an incorporation perspective, recognizing the organizations you want to serve, the potential complexities of foreign ownership and investment, and how that can be brought to bear on your ability to operate. I think, knowing that stuff up front helps you navigate it a bit better so you can actually go faster.
Yeah, great nuggets for sure. And I couldn't agree more. The mission piece is huge. Having served, and man, I've been with some other organizations, if you will, or companies. And without the mission, it's just a very different game. But having a mission for everyone to, corral behind, and, you've got your guiding principle and, your Northern Star, if you will, that is very powerful.
Yeah, I want people who care about about the mission as much as our customers do, and many of the folks who work with us, come out of the very same places that they work and support with every day. And not only do you have that advantage of really engaged people who care deeply, but when things happen, if I look at, post, October 7, it wasn't hard for me to go to our people and say, hey, we're going to work the same hours as the customer and support them, consistent with their shift work all the way through. There's a handful of leaders and a handful of companies in the civilian sector that can pull that off consistently, but that's not easy for us. Hey, this is the work that needs to be done to support the customer. We're all in.
That's amazing. Well, last question, we'll cover this, but, as we look at, let's pick like a number 10 years from now, there are going to be companies that really leaned into kind of this new era of defense and, with defense tech AI, if you will, and there are going to be some that fell behind. What's going to be the reason for those that fell off the back of the train, and what should leaders now and companies like that be doing to make sure they don't fall behind?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, when you have one of the amazing things about this country is the private sector capitalization for innovative companies. With that, you're going to produce a lot of companies, that don't make it. So that's just kind of part of the course. But I think the ones that do, and you're talking about a low odds game, probably 5% of these companies will kind of make it as independent companies, becoming indispensable to your customers as quickly as you possibly can. The fundamental reality is the government, as difficult as it may be to win a contract, if you are providing a vital capability and you are trustworthy and you support that, you've got a customer, a predictable customer that you have the ability to grow with over time, and it's going to lead to the next customer. So as quickly as you can, develop indispensability and trust against critical mission sets.
Yeah, great advice for sure. Well, Sean, it's been an honor having you on. I mean, what a great background perspective. We could keep going. I'm looking at the clock and like, crap, we got to wrap this up. It's been amazing. If folks want to follow, Primer or yourself, want to get involved or need some help, how best would they do that?
Yeah, probably, easiest way, probably, LinkedIn, that's where we put most of our stuff. People can also come in through the website. I'm easy to find, probably too easy in today's world, but on LinkedIn. But if people want to shoot me a message or an intro request there, I'm happy to see it. And then obviously through the website, we're always around, we're responsive. So I'm happy to talk to any of the audience who might be able to help or just to chat.
Awesome. Wonderful time. Thank you so much, sir. And I look forward to sharing a beer or a beverage sometime with you.
I would love that. Dave, thanks so much. Been an honor and privilege. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.